Chapter 1. Introductory. In an old time, long ago, when the fairies were in the world, there lived a little girl so uncommonly fair and pleasant of look that they called her Snowflower. This girl was as good as well as pretty. No one had ever seen her frown or heard her say a cross word, and young and old were glad when they saw her coming. Snowflower had no relation in the world, but a very old grandmother called Dame Frostyface. People did not like her quite so well as her granddaughter, for she was cross enough at times, but always kind to Snowflower. And they lived together in a little cottage built of peat, thatched with reeds, on the edge of a great forest. Tall trees sheltered its back from the north wind. The midday sun made its front warm and cheerful. Swallows built in the eaves. Daisies grew thick at the door. But there were none in all that country poorer than Snowflower and her grandmother. A cat and 2 hens were all their lively stock. Their bed was dry grass, and the only good piece of furniture in the cottage was a great armchair with wheels on its feet, a black velvet cushion, and many curious carvings of flowers and fawns on its dark oaken back. On that chair Dame Frostyface sat spinning from morning till night to maintain herself and her granddaughter, while Snowflower gathered sticks for firing, looking after the hens and the cats, and did whatever else her grandmother bade her. There was nobody in the shire could spin such fine yarn as Dame Frostyface, but she spun very slowly. Her wheels was as old as herself, and far the more worn. Indeed, the wonder was that it did not fall to pieces. So the dame's earnings were small, and their living meagre. Snowflower, however, felt no want of good dinners or fine clothes. Every evening, when the fire was heaped with the sticks she had gathered, till it blazed and crackled up the cottage chimney, Dame Frostyface set her aside her wheel and told her a new story. Often did the little girl wonder where her grandmother had gathered so many stories, but she soon learned that. One sunny morning, at the time of the swallows' coming, the dame rose up, put on the grey hood and mantle in which she carried her yarn to the fairs, and said, "My child, I am going a long journey to visit an aunt of mine who lives far in the north country. I cannot take you with me, because my aunt is the crossest woman alive and never liked young people. But the hens will lay eggs for you. There is barley meal in the barrel. And as you have been a good girl, I'll tell you what to do when you feel lonely. Lay your head gently on the cushion of the armchair and say, 'Chair of my grandmother, tell me a story. It was made by a cunning fairy who lived in the forest when I was young, and she gave it to me because she knew nobody could keep what they got hold of better. Remember, you must never ask a story more than once in a day. And if there be any occasion to travel, you have only to seat yourself in it, and say, "Chair of my grandmother, take me such a way." It will carry you wherever you wish. But mind to oil the wheels before you set out, for I have sat on it these 40 years in that same corner." Having said this, Dame Frostyface set forth to see her aunt in the north country. Snowflower gathered firing and looked after the hens and cat as usual. She baked herself a cake or 2 of the barley meal, but when the evening fell, the cottage looked lonely. And then Snowflower remembered her grandmother's words, and laying her head gently down, she said, "Chair of my grandmother, tell me a story." Scarce were the words spoken, when a clear voice from under the velvet cushion began to tell a new and most wonderful tale, which surprised Snowflower so much that she forgot to be frightened. After that, the good girl was lonely no more. Every morning she baked a barley cake, and every evening the chair told her a new story. But she could never find out who owned the voice, though Snowflower showed her gratitude by polishing up the oaken back and dusting the velvet cushion, till the chair looked as good as new. The swallows came and built in the eaves. The daisies grew thicker than ever at the door. But great misfortunes fell upon poor Snowflower. Notwithstanding all her care, she forgot to clip the hens' wings, and they flew away one morning to visit their friends the pheasants, who lived far in the forest. The cat followed them to see its relations. The barley meal was eaten up, except a couple of handfuls, and Snowflower had often strained her eyes in hopes of seeing the grey mantle, but there was no appearance of Dame Frostyface. "My grandmother stays long," said Snowflower to herself, "and by there will be nothing to eat. If I could get to her, perhaps she would advise me what to do, and this is a good occasion for travelling." Next day, at sunrise, Snowflower oiled the chair's wheels, baked a cake out of the last of the meal, took it in her lap by way of provision for the journey, seated herself, and said, "Chair of my grandmother, take me the way she went." Presently the chair gave a creak, and began to move out of the cottage and into the forest the very way Dame Frostyface had taken, where it rode along at the rate of a coach and six. Snowflower was amazed at this style of travelling, but the chair never stopped nor stayed the whole summer day, till as the sun was setting they came upon an open space, where 100 men were hewing down the tall trees with their axes, 100 more were cleaving them for firewood, and 20 waggoners with horses and wagons were carrying the wood away. "Oh, chair of my grandmother, stop!" said Snowflower, for she was tired, and also wished to know what this might mean. The chair immediately stood still, and Snowflower, seeing an old woodcutter who looked civil, stepped up to him and said, "Good father, tell me why you cut all this wood." "What ignorant country girl are you," replied the man, "not to have heard of the great feast which our sovereign King Winwealth means to give on the birthday of his only daughter, the Princess Greedelind? It will last 7 days. Everybody will be feasted, and this wood is to roast the oxen and the sheep, the geese and the turkeys, amongst whom there is a great lamentation throughout the land." When Snowflower heard that, she could not help wishing to see, and perhaps share in such a noble feast, after living so long on barley cakes. So, seating herself, she said, "A chair of my grandmother, take me quickly to the palace of King Winwealth." The words were hardly spoken when off the chair started through the trees and out of the forest, to the great amazement of the woodcutters, who, never having seen such a sight before, threw down their axes, left their wagons, and followed Snowflower to the gates of a great and splendid city, fortified with strong walls and high towers, and standing in the midst of a wide plain covered with cornfields, orchards, and villages.